I have said on numerous occasions that I would likely never do a response video, but Ken Ham exists, so I can only stay strong for so long. So here we are. Let's talk about atheism and children. Hi, I am Shannon Q, and as some of you may know, I work with Paul on the Paulogia channel, and as a part of that work, I frequently and unfortunately watch Answers News live so that we can address their scientific claims. However, recently while we were watching, Ken deviated from pseudoscience and said this.
I just want you to know, I give atheists purpose and meaning in life.
That's true.
Yeah, there are some of those atheists that sit out there, they're in their mother's basement, and they've got their computer, and they're waiting for a Ken Ham tweet.
Now, I'm afraid Ken blocked me from Twitter for quoting him Bible verses that contradict his rhetoric, so I didn't get to see this tweet firsthand, but it was provided to me. And given the context of what Ken and his counterparts continue to say here, I feel like it merits some further analysis.
The issue here is, within their own worldview, within an atheistic worldview, can you make sense of being positive, or can you even define it within that religion? And see, they basically ignored that. That's called a straw man. Then they said, well, see, look, we can be positive. Well, that wasn't really the argument.
The interesting thing is, when they're trying to be positive, the one thing he didn't mention was, he goes through and says, I tell this to kids, and we can tell this message to kids, and so on. The one thing he didn't say to them was, and when you're dead, you won't remember you're here, and this article will be meaningless because you won't remember it either.
So what if you were positive or negative?
Yeah.
There is a great deal to address in this brief excerpt. So in order to ensure the appropriate perspective, we should place the conversation in context. One thing that isn't presented in this discussion on Answers News is the tweet in question. So let's do that here. In the tweet, Ken writes, "What positive message would an atheist have for kids? Something like, kids, you're just an animal. There's no God. When you die, you won't know you existed. Decide your own rules for life. Treat others to benefit you. Life's ultimately meaningless." Now that we have significant grounds for the context of what Ken intended to imply, we can reasonably extrapolate that the impetus of the tweet itself regards an atheist's inability to impart positive messages to children. However, when you open the article that the tweet is endorsing, the contextual layers become increasingly nefarious. The article that Ken tweeted, which I've linked in the description box below, was comprised of a scathing and vitriolic, overtly anti-atheist speculation about the upcoming children's books that Richard Dawkins will be publishing. The article itself includes the following excerpt. "Atheism is that odd faith that says there is no God, so perhaps the pages will be blank to reflect the emptiness of it all." So, now that we have the information required to understand the impetus of the tweet, I'd like to relate my understanding of its meaning. It would appear that Ken found an article that supported his view, the view that atheism is inherently nihilistic and leads intrinsically to meaninglessness. Because based on his misunderstanding, this is the logical conclusion an atheist must come to. They could ultimately have no message for a child that can denote meaning for them, and thus any superficial positivity is either borrowed or negated. On behalf of the growing atheist demographic, and as more of our voices become prevalent and relevant to the culture, it's important that claims like these are dissected and addressed. Atheists, and in this instance, specifically atheist parents and child caregivers, shouldn't be persuaded by this innately dangerous and ill-informed perspective, nor should theists who may be influenced by this type of rhetoric. And here's why. How children perceive and contextualize meaning differs significantly from the context being implied here. There have been many studies performed to assess how children imbued meaning on their life and on the world. In most instances, what a child perceives as the most meaningful and important aspect of their existence is, unsurprisingly, their family and their close relationships. A child doesn't yet have the higher order cognitive faculties to grapple with questions of existential meaning. The derivation of their life meaning revolves instead around the perceived health of the most important relationships that they have. So let's take another few moments and unpack and consider the message Ken is sending here. If the ability to adequately communicate and impart meaning to a child is imperative, what does a healthy sense of meaning look like from a child's perspective? Many studies have been done to understand how children perceive and conceptualize meaning. As I mentioned before, it seems that overwhelmingly a child's most important conceptualization of meaning has everything to do with those close family bonds. This forms their attachment style and is a powerful indicator of their psychological affect throughout the rest of their lives. So the most important message anyone can give a child in order to ensure that their most important contextualized form of meaning is met is love, support, and an appropriate degree of attention. Religious adherents don't have a monopoly on caring for and about children, so this portion of the argument that Ken is making inherently falls apart. But what about the other components? Do atheists have no choice but to transmit a message to children that, from our perspective, they are meaningless, and when they die, they won't have mattered? And if we don't, is this because we're borrowing the Christian worldview in order to do an adequate job of raising our children?
You know, he's trying to say, well, you need to make the world a better place. You need to be kind.
Who decides what's better?
Based on what?
That's right. He never defined positive. He has to borrow that from a Christian worldview. Now, I want to encourage him to do that, but within his own worldview, he can't make sense of it.
This position just intrinsically assumes that any perspective other than Christianity is incapable of recognizing and assigning value to any experience or entity. It also calls into question what gives something value. Is something only of value if it exists in perpetuity? If something is finite and rare, does it have no value? There is a really strong argument to be made that the contrary is true. The rarity of life, its finite properties, and fleeting nature impart more value to those who recognize its properties as temporary. So, how do we communicate this appropriately to children as atheists? Do we tell our children the state they currently exist in is temporary, and ultimately a temporal permanent existence is inevitable and will exceed in all qualities and transcend what they experience now, if only they behave according to a specific set of rules and worship a specific deity? That would be borrowing from the Christian worldview. But no, of course it isn't. We're not Christians. Studies indicate that by the age of 6, most children have a strong conceptualization of the finality of death. At this age, many have been exposed to death of someone close to them, or they at the very least have been exposed to and understand the concept. Even further research indicates that when a child is given honest accounts of its finality, they have less cognitive disparity and anxiety regarding death's inevitability and are more secure as they develop. I recognize that this is a sensitive topic. None of us want our children to have to grapple with something this painful, but when they ultimately must, honest approaches regarding what death is and means will ensure they experience no cognitive inconsistencies, and support and validation of their emotional experience is demonstrated to be incredibly developmentally beneficial. So now we know that as atheists, we're demonstrated to be capable of imparting meaning and value and assisting our children in forming healthy ideas regarding mortality. But perhaps we still raise selfish children who exist only to satiate their own desires. Again, no. This demonstrates a further misunderstanding of overall human nature and child rearing. We've evolved together as a group. The development of empathetic properties to our consciousness and the demonstrated value of being cooperative collectives has sustained us as a species. Even further to this, we dislike and function poorly in isolation and garner feelings of value from contributing to one another. These traits are biologically beneficial. There's nothing incoherent about wanting to help and support others from an atheist perspective. Even from a selfish perspective, the emergence of emotional gratification from contributing to the life of another has pretty solid efficacy. These arguments entirely ignore the prevalence of emotional and physical connection to physiological and mental well-being. Engaging in behaviors that utilize others only for your own benefit is an act of self-attrition from society and negates those connections, the ones from which we derive the most value in our human experience and help us survive. An atheist child caregiver or parent, or any atheist who cares for a child, can have amazing things to teach and impart. A world of support and care for the sake of the experience itself, not because it's a mandate to be upheld. A perspective of how precious life is and an honesty regarding how experiences are perceived. Now, to be abundantly clear, these aren't unique to atheists. Parents of all religious ilks are doing an amazing job in loving, supporting, being honest with, and guiding all of our children into adulthood. I'd simply ask that instead of unfounded judgment, you start with an attempt at understanding and give us the same respect. That way we can all raise children who are better than this. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. We have already exceeded 4,000 subscribers. I am humbled and amazed. If you aren't already subscribed, please consider clicking the subscription button and the bell down below so that you can get notifications when new videos are posted. And as always, thank you so much to my patrons. Your support is immeasurable to continuing to do this. If you'd like to support the channel through Patreon or PayPal, there are links in the description, and I've included also links to all of the relevant research that was used in this video. Please take some time and go through the research so that you can gain your own perspective on my commentary. I can't wait to hear what you all think in the comments section, and as always, help elevate the discourse.